Right. So for the next 1.5 hour, what I would do, I would just revise you all the important areas of structure of atom, and then with questions obviously. And other than that, you had certain requests about some areas where you wanted to discuss. So we will directly go on to that and discuss. Okay. And if you haven't been clear at any point, you can stop me. We can definitely discuss on that particular concept, and then we'll go ahead. Okay, now let us start with this. What I've put it out are some important points which you must know while studying right from the start of the structure of atom. I have definitely ignored some concepts like what is Dalton's atomic model, which is pretty much easy that you can read and understand. And at the same time, you do understand what are cathode rays, right? What are its properties? Again, that is not a very big deal, but there are few areas in the cathode rays where we might usually get a struggle. Now let us see what are those areas where we will usually get a point where we have to understand the concept carefully when it comes to cathode rays. See, we know that when it comes to cathode rays, they are generated at this negative terminal and they would move towards this positive terminal. In fact, we will keep a zinc sulfide screen here just to observe those cathode rays. Now, this is how much we know. What we don't know is that in case if there is a metal, if we put it in between the path of the cathode rays, we would be able to extract Gen rays. We will be able to generate X-rays. Now, what does that mean? When it comes to cathode rays, they are high energy beam of electrons which are trying to fall on the surface of the metal. If uh, energy that energy waves would fall on the surface electron, we can observe these three types of transitions. If electrons come out of the surface, right, they will also generate cathode rays. See, they will also generate cathode rays. But if the electrons will keep moving from outer orbital to inner orbital like this in an atom, then they would also start giving energy waves or energy radiation, and this time these radiations are X-rays. So X-rays are generated by the transition of electrons from outer to inner shells. Lastly, you could see if electrons will get captured by the nucleus, and from there electrons are and from there some rays are coming back, right? So then these are beta rays. So beta rays are usually uh, generated from the nucleus. Correct. So these are the three types of rays you must be aware of: when cathode rays are generated, when X-rays are generated, and when beta rays are generated. Correct. So cathode rays are generated when electron completely comes out of the atom and keeps moving with high speeds. That is what we call it as cathode rays. Within the electron transition, if the energy is released, then those are X-rays, and beta rays always comes from nucleus. Okay. Next important points. Don't worry about writing anything right now. Okay, I will be sharing my notes. So wherever needed, especially when the problem solving comes, I myself will ask you to solve. Okay. Next, another important area where we struggle is understanding electrical field versus magnetic field, which is proposed by Thomson. So what, according to J.J. Thomson, says that cathode rays will definitely deflect under electrical field as well as they deflect under magnetic field. But if I adjust the field of if I adjust electrical and magnetic fields such a way that both their magnitude are equal, then the electrons will travel in straight lines without any deviation, right? So this can be mathematically very helpful for us to derive the relation between charge of electron and mass of electron. Let us say the charge of electron is E. Let us assume the charge of electron is E. Then the force due to the electrical field, if you see this force due to this electrical field on the cathode rays, can be written as charge into electrical field. E represents electrical field. We don't have to derive and understand what is electric field right now, because you will be you have a separate chapter called electrostatics in physics, where you will be learning in detail about what is this E. Our idea is only to balance the forces here. Same way, if you see the force due to magnetic field, that is B into V into Q, where B is the magnetic field strength, V is the velocity of the electrons or the velocity of the particles, and Q is the charge carried by those particles. So, if cathode rays are going straight without any deflection like this, which means this force and this force are balanced. So, if I can balance these two forces, what I would get this as BVG is equal to Q into E, where QE, okay, this I'll write it as electrical field and this is magnetic field. So force due to magnetic field and force due to electrical field, both of them are balanced. Now from here you could see this Q and Q would get cancelled. We will get something like speed of electron or speed of these particles is equal to E by B, and where V is speed of this electron. I guess all of you understood so far. This was directly asked in JEE, like what exactly is the speed of electron in terms of electrical field and magnetic field. So that way you should be able to understand where it comes. Okay. Next, another important point you need to learn from here is that suppose if there is a electrical field present, let's say there is an electrical field present with voltage V, which is what we call it as potential difference, right? I'm pretty sure you may have come across the cases like suppose if there is any potential difference between these two metal plates, let's say one side is positive, the other side is negative. So the entire space between them will have some electrical field, and if a particle, a charged particle is placed in the electrical field, then that experiences a potential energy. Because of that field, either there would be an attraction. If it is negatively charged, there would be attraction towards positive charge. If this charge particle is positive, it will have a attraction towards the negative side. So that way, any charged particle, if it was placed in a electrical field, it would experience some potential energy, and that potential energy, what we call it as the electrical field energy, is charge into voltage difference. If I'm not sure, if you may have learned this in 9th or 10th standard, just recall it. Potential energy or the work, what we say, the electrical work is always given as potential difference multiplied by the charge. Okay, this capital V which I have written is actually a potential difference. So potential energy or the work that is done on this charged particle would be Q into potential difference. How would this help us? See, we got one important idea here, that speed of charged particle can be represented as E by B, and another thing what we got it as potential energy can be written as Q into V. And if this electron completely which was stationary and it moves towards, suppose if this is a electron and it completely moves towards this positively charged terminal, which means its entire potential energy was converted into kinetic energy. So that's what we can write down. When electron moves, the entire potential energy which it has will be converted into kinetic energy. So I can write potential energy is equal to kinetic energy implies Q into V is equal to half into me into Ve square, where V is this velocity and this capital V is potential difference or voltage difference. So Ve, velocity of an electron square, will be equal to 2q into potential difference divided by me. And we just learned that Ve, velocity, can be written in terms of E and B. So E by B whole square is equal to 2q V by m. And from there you can see I can isolate this Q by m is equal to E square by B square into 2 times of V, where V is the voltage difference. So from here what we were able to find out is the charge by mass ratio for electron, and this would be pretty much useful for solving. So I think you understood the formula, how to derive. Now second important thing is, using this information Thomson was able to determine, because electrical field, magnetic field is in our hands to adjust, and potential difference is also in our hands to adjust. So on a particular adjustment he was able to calculate a constant value for charge of electron by mass of electron, and that value turned out to be 1.76 into 10 raised to power of 11 coulombs per kg. Okay, so I'm pretty sure you have come across this. So this is one thing you must remember, how it has been done, right? So then other important concept you may have come across is the Millikan's oil drop experiment, which was the breakthrough for finding out the exact charge of electron, exact charge of proton, and so on. Okay, so first of all I want you to understand, if a very small particles, maybe for example if I take a what do you say, a small peanut, okay, a small peanut, and drop it in honey. Okay, first drop it from a distance. As it goes down, first it catches with some acceleration, but once it reaches into the viscous solution, which is honey, after some time it would start moving with constant speed. Got it? And this is the nature of every particle. If they are under viscous region, they would attain a constant speed. For example, if you are if you are dropping a feather from a particular height, it will also experience the same thing, right? That feather would slowly move down with a constant speed, right? Because it is having an air viscosity. So because of the viscous nature of air, that would come slowly. So this is one thing you need to understand first, that any particle, if it is going through a viscous region, it would attain a constant speed after some time. Okay, we will use this fundamental in Millikan's oil drop experiment, where you see what we are doing through a funnel. We are making a very small oil droplets, and those oil droplets are falling, right? And here we have air. Got it? So in air, it is experiencing that viscous force from air. So it would attain a constant speed after some time. Got it? So that's what I'm trying to explain here now. And check this, both these plates are electrical plates which are connected to the external electricity. And another thing what we are doing, simultaneously I am passing X-rays through this. Got it? So what is the important job of X-rays and what is the point of oil drop? Let us try to understand. See, first of all, if an oil drop attains a constant speed, that speed is called terminal velocity. Got it? Remember that the speed is called terminal velocity. So in JEE 2010, it was directly asked what is the terminal velocity. So you should understand that it is the constant velocity which an electron, which an oil drop will attain as it goes through uh, a viscous air. Got it? Next, if we pass X-rays, what we are expected, the air gas which is present here, right? So that would get ionized. That would get ionized and releases electrons, because X-rays would have high frequency, so they will ionize the atoms which are coming on its way and increase the electron rich space. So those electrons will get absorbed on the oil droplet. So suppose if this is an oil droplet, so electrons will get absorbed on the surface of the oil droplet like this. Okay. Now let us assume the total charge on the oil droplet is Q. Okay, because there might be a bunch of electrons that might have accumulated on the oil droplet, and I'm calling that charge as Q. And when external electrical field is absent, got it, imagine I have not connected, so I'm taking two situations. First, the external field is absent. In that case, I can say when the oil droplet is falling down, it is falling because of gravity, so it would have mg, and viscous force will be acting opposite to that, what we call it as more like a buoyant force also. So viscous force would be equal to mg, right? Now this viscous force we can directly fetch it from the liquid states chapter, and we will be able to write this, the 6 pi eta r into v. Okay, so where eta is the coefficient of viscosity, r is the radius of that droplet, got it, and this v which I am writing is the terminal velocity. Okay, so let me write this terminal velocity as v1 when external electrical field is absent. Okay, so we have eta, r and v1. This we don't have to derive it right now, we have a complete chapter in physics, right? So where you will be deriving that. Okay, anyways, our objective is to make sure that this viscous force is balanced by this mg, then oil droplet will stop. So which means 2 pi eta r v1 is equal to mass, I am writing it as 4 by 3 pi r cube, which is the volume multiplied by density of the oil into g, right? So from here we got volume density into g, and you can see this r will get cancelled and this will become r square. So r square will be equal to 9 by 2 times of eta v1 by rho oil into g. So that's how we can get the radius of the oil droplet. This could be directly asked in the exam, so you should be able to derive how to calculate that r. So we would be able to calculate the radius of the oil droplet from here, and once we get that, now we apply the electrical field. Once you apply the electrical field, now we will have electrical field also acting up, right? So because you can imagine this, if this is an oil droplet and electrons are adsorbed on the surface, suppose if in electrical field the positive terminal is upwards, so you can see that these electrons will be attracted by this plate, right? So we will have this QE, which is the electrical force field, which will be applying upwards, mg will be down, and now this particle is trying to move up, so viscous force will be down now. I hope all of you are able to understand. Now once you apply the electrical field, this would be the new situation, right? So now what I can write, this QE would be equal to viscous force plus mg. Okay, now this Q, because now the particle is moving up and it is moving with a constant speed, which is v2, and this is the terminal velocity in terms of electrical field. Okay, which means when you have electrical field applied, then a new terminal velocity is coming, which is V2. So now this Q into E would be equal to viscous force, which we have learned as, 6 pi eta R and V2 plus mg. Acha, if you just recall beta, mg, we have already derived mg as viscous force before, right? Mg is equal to this. So I can use that here to simplify. So I can write this as 6 pi eta R V1. So everything gets common. So 6 pi eta R V1 plus V2 is what I would get this, and this E, if at all I bring it down, it will become by E. So now if you observe, all of these factors are known to us. Okay, practically हम लोग V1 V2 calculate कर सकते हैं experiment के through. We could calculate E also, which is the electrical field, because as an experiment we are only giving that electrical field. R is something which we have calculated already from above, and by this logic Mulliken was able to calculate Q, which is the absolute charge of those particles. Now this Q can get different values, right? Why it can get different values? Suppose if this is an oil droplet, if there is only one electron, it will get one particular value. Suppose if there are 4 electrons which were absorbed on the surface, then this Q may be different value. But one thing he has observed, that every time he does an experiment with different values of E, right, then he was able to calculate a common factor of this. This is the common factor which he found, that 1.602 into 10 raised to power of minus 19 coulombs was the minimum value. Rest all were like this. For example, this was 4 times of that value. If there are n particles, you'll have n times of that value, right? So the total charge would always be this n times that Q. So the smallest value which he was found was this. Then he realized that this is the exact charge of an electron. I hope that point is clear. So on this basis, there were few questions asked in JEE. I will show you one. Okay, so you should be able to follow this. Check. In an oil drop experiment, the terminal velocity was found to be 1 meters per second in the absence of electrical field. मतलब ये हमने जो डिस्कस किया था उसके बेसिस पे this is V1, right? And V1 is given as 1 meters per second. And second, in the presence of electrical field, it is given as 2 meters per second. मतलब V2 is given as 2 meters per second. And electrical field strength of this much volts per meter. So E value दिया हुआ है. Rho of oil, density of oil was given. Coefficient of viscosity of air is given. So nu is given. Right. So everything else is given. We need to calculate first the radius, then the charge on the droplet. Okay. So just to remind the formula, we learned that R square was 9 by 2 eta V1 by rho of oil into G. This is what we have learned. So R would be under root of that. Substituting those values, 9 by 2 into eta is 2 into 10 raised to power of 5 into V1. If you check out, V1 was only 1. So that is 1 divided by rho of oil. Oil is 1 gram per ml multiplied by G. G I'll take it as 10. Got it? So whatever I have calculated here, I have to make sure that this rho, which is in gram per ml, I have to make that in kgs per meter cube. So I'll get 10 raised to power of 3 get multiplied. Right. So we will be able to solve R from here, and that R will come in terms of meters. So which is the radius of the oil droplet. I hope you guys are following that. Next. Second, what we have seen after applying the electrical field, we saw that as 6 pi eta into R, V1 plus V2 was the formula. So from there we were able to calculate this as 6 times of pi, and you see E is already given to us. E is already given to us, so I'll just substitute that, which implies Q is equal to 6 pi eta R into V1 plus V2 divided by E. E value is given as this much, 6.75 into 10 raised to power of 6. So it is 6.75 into 10 raised to power of 6 pi. So a lot of these things will get cancelled off, and we will get the value of Q, and on calculating exactly we will get this as 1.602 into 10 raised to power of minus 19 coulombs. So I have straight away taken from the data of Mulliken. Okay, this is exactly what he got. But I hope all of you understood the logic of Millikan's oil drop experiment. Aradhya, have you understood this better? These are two concepts which we usually do not get to learn much in the classes, so just check it out. In JEE Advanced, if at all you come across these two cases, you should be aware of it. Okay. Now, if you check out next thing, what you need to know, based on the charge of electron, we will be able to calculate the mass of electron, and that comes to be 9.1 into 10 raised to power of minus 31 kgs. Because now I got the charge already, E by m value we got already before. So using that we can get the mass of the electron. Same way, if you see the canal rays or perforated cathode rays, by which we can calculate the charge of an proton. So the same logic can be applied, and first E by m value was calculated. Okay, we do the same thing here also. BVQ is equal to Q into E, right? But this time this charge is for that proton. So you apply that, you will be able to get that E by m for proton as this value. You don't have to remember this. Okay. Now, when it comes to the charge of proton or charge of positive charge particles, the positive charge particles are always be generated by ionized gases. Like H plus is generated from H2, helium 2 plus is generated from helium atoms. Got it? Now, if you see the charge of H plus and He2 plus is different, mass is also different. So that's why you will observe E by m value of all the gases. Got it? E by m value of all the gases would be different. So if you have hydrogen and helium, the values would be different. So E by m value of hydrogen plus and helium 2 plus would be different. On the other hand, electrons E by m will always remain constant irrespective of whether it is coming from hydrogen, whether it is coming from helium, or so on. So using the same Millikan's oil drop experiment, this time again we can calculate the charge of proton, and that comes out to be this much, right? Sorry, mass of proton. So we can calculate the mass of proton, and that comes out to be this much. So which is 1.673 into 10 raised to power of minus 27 kgs. And if you compare the mass of proton and electron, that comes to be 1837 times that of mass of electron. I am hoping that you all know this, so I am just rushing through this so that we can focus more on the problem solving part. Okay. 1 AMU is defined as the mass of, see, by definition 1 AMU is defined as the 1 by 12th mass of carbon 12 isotope, right? So when you calculate the absolute value, it comes out to be 1.67 into 10 raised to power of minus 27 kgs. So if you write the mass of proton in terms of AMU, it comes to be 1.0076. But for our calculation, we always take mass of proton also approximately same as 1 AMU. Okay. Mass of discovery of neutron has happened on the basis of bombardment of beryllium nucleus, right, with helium, which is alpha rays, right. Alpha rays are nothing but helium 2 plus ions which are moving with high speed. So you can see these are alpha rays, which on bombardment with beryllium, this beryllium got converted into carbon. So how this radioactive reaction is done, you will learn this in radioactivity. Okay, so we don't have to worry about that. Now, as it happened, this entire experiment was done in a closed container, I mean lead chamber, in the lead chamber, and there were some rays coming out of it. When there was some particles coming out, it was subjected to electrical field, but there was no diversion of those particular rays. So which suggested that this rays must be neutral charged, but it has sufficient mass and it was named as neutron. So it has a neutral particle with no charge and this was its mass. Got it? And here you can see that mass of neutron is slightly more than that of proton, which is much more than that of electron. Got it? So I think these are the importance of fundamental particle. I'm pretty sure you must be aware of this. Okay. Next, Rutherford's gold foil experiment. I'm pretty sure you know that first we generate alpha rays through radioactive element, and those alpha rays are bombarded on the gold foil, which is very thin, and most 99% of the rays will travel through that, except of very few percentage got deflected or scattered. Some got rebounded. Okay, so alpha particle is nothing but basically it is helium, right? Now there are two things which we need to mathematically understand here, especially for problem solving. Check it out. Suppose if this is the nucleus, if an alpha particle was here and it is moving towards the nucleus, then if it is head on, then it will go close to it and come back. It will rebound. But if it is not head on, suppose if the alpha rays are here, if it is moving, then it will definitely start deviating, correct? Which means after a certain time it will start scattering like this. Now if the distance from this head on line to that of this distance is b, let us say this distance is b, and the angle of the scattering rays is, let us take it as theta, then we can calculate how many number of alpha particles will actually get deviated. Got it? Again, we do not have to get into the derivation part of it, but you must know the value of that formula, that is number of alpha particles deviated at an angle will be 1 by sine power 4 theta by 2, okay, or sine theta by 2 power 4. Okay, so when you compare any two particles here, so you should be able to compare this. So depending upon the theta, we will be able to comment how many number of alpha particles can be deviated. Okay, remember that. Next, tan theta by 2, right? The same thing, tan theta by 2 can be written as the force of attraction between this nucleus and this alpha particle. Got it? So this alpha particle, as it comes here, after certain time it has deflected, which means it got repelled, right? So that force of repulsion can be represented in terms of this tan theta. That comes out to be some constant k into Z1e. Z1 is the atomic mass of helium, mass number of atomic number of helium, and E is the charge of that helium. Got it? And Z2 is the atomic number of that nucleus. E is the charge of that nucleus. So Z1 into E, Z2 into E divided by mv square into B. So B is this distance between that head-on line and the scattering line, and that is called impact parameter. So in JEE this was directly asked as a problem solving. So if at all you will come across this in your exams, so be prepared with this. One, what is an impact parameter? How do we get tan theta part here? Got it? And how do we get number of alpha particles deviated with an angle? Okay. Here they will give you a formula. Normally you will be given like this. Okay. Number of alpha particles deviated is equal to some constant into 1 by sine power 4 theta by 2, and this constant value will be given, so you have to calculate this n. So that's how you will be given in the exams. Any doubt with the Rutherford's model? Right. So there are another two important conclusions from Rutherford's model. One, he was able to calculate the radius of the nucleus, right? And that radius of the nucleus was almost of this range. It is R naught into a raised to power of 1 by 3, where a is the atomic mass number. You are aware of what is atomic mass number? Everyone is, I hope all of you understand what is A and Z, right? A is atomic mass number, which is the number of protons plus neutrons. Z is the atomic number, which is number of protons. Okay. And this R naught value was approximately 1.3 into 10 raised to power of minus 15 meters. Okay. Okay, this is a very prominent JEE main question. I mean, at least in the last 4 years it has been asked at least once. So you be aware of this formula. Directly you have to substitute that and calculate. So radius of the nucleus would be equal to R naught a raised to power of 1 by 3. Okay. Now you will come across this units a lot of times here. Fermi, 1 Fermi is 10 raised to power of minus 15 meters. Another important conclusion Rutherford derived was the total mass of the atom is mostly in the nucleus. Okay, because you can see that if at all I put the value of density is mass by, density is mass by volume, and I already got the radius. If I put that value in the volume terms here, this density is coming out to be in the range of 10 raised to power of 15 grams per cc. So you can imagine here, which means 1 cc, 1 cubic centimeter will have 10 raised to power of 15 grams of mass. So which means the entire mass of the atom will be concentrated in nucleus only. So this was another important mathematical conclusion given by Rutherford. The last conclusion which was given by Rutherford, actually this was not Rutherford's theory, this was Coulomb's theory, but the same could be useful here, that how to calculate the distance of the closest approach. You will see this in physics also. In modern physics, lot of questions are there in here. In chemistry it was asked twice in the last 5 years, so you can check out, this is also an important area. Suppose if you have an alpha particle which is moving head on, right? So which is moving head on, and it started with a speed of v. So which means it has some kinetic energy, and as it reached to the point B, right, the kinetic energy has become 0. Why it has become 0? Because of the repulsion it is experiencing from the nucleus. Okay, so it means from this point, when this, as it reached to the point B, can I say at point B the entire potential kinetic energy has converted into its potential energy, right? So at this point B, I can say that potential energy is equal to kinetic energy. So I can say that half into, okay, kinetic energy was of this alpha particle. Alpha particle will have some mass of helium into V square, V of helium square, right? That is equal to potential energy, which is K into Z, where Z is the nucleus of this atom. Okay, recently there was a question asked with copper's nucleus. Got it? He took, instead of iron, he took copper for scattering rays, and he asked what is the closest distance, this R minimum. Okay, so Kz into Z into E, which is the charge of this nucleus, into charge of Z. Z is the 2 value, right? For helium, Z value is 2, into E, which is the charge, and this is the charge of 1 electron. There are already 2 electrons in it. I mean 2 proton charge it has. So this, got it, divided by R minimum. Okay, right guys? Oh sorry, these two I have already taken. So E. So what I can get from here is that half into, can I write mass of a helium as 2 times the mass of proton plus 2 times the mass of neutron, that into speed of helium 2 plus ion square is equal to kz 2 times E square by R minimum. Right. So from here you have to calculate R minimum. So this is how you have to use the closest distance approach. Check out what I'm saying. If you have a nucleus here, okay, and alpha rays are approaching, because alpha rays is also positively charged and nucleus is positively charged, they would start repelling as the alpha particle comes close by. At some point this alpha particle will cease to the case where kinetic energy becomes zero. Here the kinetic energy of alpha particles is half into mass of alpha particle and velocity of alpha particle square. This is what it is. And as it reaches here, that kinetic energy has become zero. So which means this entire energy which was here has been converted into potential energy. So that means this potential energy which is present here is because of the repulsion between these two particles. If you may have learned from Newton's law of repulsion or Newton's law of attraction, got it? If any two charged particles, okay, if at all I have Z1 and Z2 charged particles separated by a distance r, the repulsions between them is kz1 z2 by r square, and the potential energy between them is into r. Okay, force into displacement, what do we get? You will get energy only, no? So this is the force multiplied by the displacement. So one r will get cancelled. So we will have some constant z1 z2 by r. So that is the same potential energy which I am writing. Constant, this is z1, z1 as in the charge of this nucleus, right, multiplied by the charge of the alpha particle. Charge of the alpha particle is 2 times the charge of proton. This is z times the charge of proton, that divided by the distance between these two, which is r minimum. So the closest distance is nothing but this r minimum. So our objective is to calculate this closest distance. Just to go through few definitions once again, check out atomic number is nothing but number of protons or electrons. Mass number, you can see it is the number of nucleons, which is neutrons and protons. You could be asked about what are isotopes. Isotopes are nothing but elements having same atomic number but different mass number. Got it? So mass number is different but atomic number is same. Okay. Isobars are the ones which have different atomic number but same mass number. For example, if you check out here, carbon 12, carbon 13, carbon 14. They have same atomic number but different mass number. These are isotopes. Similarly, hydrogen 11, which you call it as protium, hydrogen 2, deuterium, hydrogen 31, tritium. All these three are isotopes of each other. Isobars, having same mass number but different atomic number. So these two are mass numbers. Similarly, check out potassium 3919, calcium 1939. Right. So these two are also isobars of each other. Okay. Usually you will see isotopes will have same chemical properties but different physical properties. Got it? Because when it comes to chemical properties, it all depends upon the outermost electrons. Because the number of protons are same, for a neutral atom, number of electrons will also be same. So therefore, chemical properties will be same but physical properties will be different. Okay. And usually we see this is an important question that was asked in JEE once, okay, that if you consider, you know, sodium's reaction in water and heavy water. D2O is heavy water, H2O is light water which we use. So if we add sodium to water or heavy water, then we will get half H2 or half D2. Got it? Sodium will get dissolved here, it will form NaOH or NaOD, and this will get this. So let's say the rate of the first reaction is RH, the rate of the second reaction is RD. Then if you consider the rate of these two, you will always find that RH is greater than RD, or RH by RD is always greater than 1. This is called isotopic effect, which means generally heavier isotopes will always have slower rate of reactions because they usually are strongly bonded. In organic chemistry, you will see this application a lot, isotopic effect application a lot, where you will always consider carbon hydrogen bond and carbon deuterium bond. And if you see this bond and this bond, the second one, the carbon deuterium bond is always stronger. Okay, and the logic is heavier isotopes will strongly bond, and hence they react slow because it requires more amount of energy to break the bond. Are you with me on this, guys? So be aware of that isotopic point here. Okay, isotopic effect. Next, see what are isotones. If we have same number of neutrons, we call them as isotones. Suppose if you see calcium and chlorine, the difference between these two are neutrons. We have 20 neutrons here, 20 neutrons here. So which means these two are isotones of each other. Sodium, we have 12 neutrons here, here also we have 12 neutrons. So sodium and magnesium are isotones of each other. Okay. Similarly, if you check out isoelectronic point, isoelectronic elements, which means elements having same number of electrons, that's all. Okay. If you see N3 minus, this species, O2 minus, F minus, neon, sodium plus, Mg2 plus, Al plus 3, all of them have different protons. Number of protons are different because this is the atomic number. But when it comes to electrons, all of them have 10 electrons. Correct? Sodium was supposed to be 7, minus 3 means it has 3 extra electrons, so that makes it 10. Oxygen will have 10 and so on. So this is one very straightforward question that can come for exams, like which of the following are isoelectronic of each other, right? So all you need to find out is the total number of electrons present in it. So if the number of electrons present in it are same, then they are called isoelectronic. One question on the basis of this isotopic which has come in JEE is this one. You should be able to do this question now. It is given a naturally occurring boron consists of 80% boron 11, okay, and 20% of another isotope. To account for the atomic weight of 10.81, okay, if the atomic weight is supposed to be 10.81, what must be the nuclide mass of other isotopes? Now, one of the important point which was mentioned by Maxwell's theory was, see, any charged particles under acceleration in a field, it will continuously lose out energy. Okay, this has been observed for any charged particle in nature, which means if suppose if at all I take an electron and I keep moving up and down like this, not just electron, any charged particle, from here to here, if at all I stop, which means it was accelerating, then decelerating, then accelerating again, decelerating again, and coming back here, decelerating. So there is a continuous acceleration, deceleration for one wave to complete. Suppose if this is in a magnetic field, then what is expected is that it would dissipate the energy in the form of wave. So that energy will come in the form of wave. Okay, and this wave which it comes is what we call it as electromagnetic radiation or electromagnetic wave. Okay, we can think the same in as a logic of this. Suppose if at all I tie a rope here and pull it up and down, so we can see a trajectory of the rope like this. So basically what I'm doing is that I'm just on swinging this, so the entire trajectory will help us understand that a wave is generated. Okay, so whatever the energy which I have spent here to do to and fro, that got transmitted through this rope like this in the form of wave. The same logic is applied to a charged particle, and this is what Maxwell's electromagnetic radiation tells us. So what his objection was, if an electron is also accelerating around the nucleus, because if it is moving at every point, you can see its velocity is changing. If its velocity is changing, means it is under acceleration. Then the electron should lose out its energy continuously, and it should spiral into the nucleus, and atom should collapse. But well, that is not happening, which means there is something else which might be happening in the atom which Rutherford could not explain. To explain that, first we need to learn the basic idea about waves. So I'm just revising that. I'm not going through each and every point because you know all this stuff. Okay. So one thing we must know, that wave is an oscillating displacement. We just saw that, right? And it depends upon both position and time. If positive displacement is done, we usually call it as crest. If negative displacement is done, it is trough, which means if at all I take any wave and I say this is a positive displacement, this is a negative displacement, this is called trough and this is called, the first one is called crest, this is trough. And the location between these two displacement, which is this one, this is called a node. Okay, so this point is called as a node. Okay. When it comes to electromagnetic radiation coming from light, right, it would propagate such a way, the light will come such a way that it will have two components. One will be a magnetic component, electrical component, and the other one will be a magnetic component, and both will be perpendicular to each other, or in short we can write this as E cross B. Okay. When you do a cross product, I am sure you may have started vectors already. When you do cross product, you will see the direction will be perpendicular to these two. So you can see Y is the direction of magnetic field, Z is the direction of electrical field. So X will be the direction of the propagation. Correct. So it will propagate in this line. And there are two things we've got to know. One is the propagation is perpendicular. Second thing, the magnitude of the amplitude of electrical field and the magnetic field will be same. So that's why they will create the same nodes. Here also, here also, here also, you can see the nodes created are same. I hope you understood what is electromagnetic radiation, or how the light as a wave appears. Okay. Light always have dual characteristic. One is wave nature, the other one is a particle nature. When we are discussing about wave nature, we need to know all the wave characteristics. So there are few wave characteristics which you got to know. It's frequency, wavelength, wave number, and so on. First, let me introduce to what is frequency. I'm sure you know what is frequency. It is the number of cycles or waves passing through a point. It is usually represented as per second or hertz. Wavelength, which is lambda, represents the distance between two crests or distance between two troughs. Usually the units which we'll be using are nanometers, picometer, angstroms, right? So nanometers is 10 raised to the power of minus 9, pico is 10 raised to the power of minus 12, angstrom is 10 raised to the power of minus 10. And a constant value which we'll be always using is the speed. So speed of light in vacuum is observed to be 3 into 10 raised to the power of 8 meters per second. And you can see that distance divided by time, so which is lambda into 1 by t. 1 by t is nothing but frequency. So C is equal to nu lambda. This comes as an important formula for us. C is equal to nu lambda. We'll be always using, where C is a constant value. Next important term is amplitude. Amplitude is the height of that crest or depth of that trough. So when we are writing a wave, so this height in this direction is what we call it as the amplitude. Either that or this, both of these are amplitude. And when it comes to electromagnetic radiation, amplitude is always related to intensity. If intensity is more, amplitude will also be more, or amplitude is more, intensity is more, and this is how it is related. Okay. How, why it is related that way, you will be learning it slowly in physics. We are not in, here to discuss about intensity. Don't worry about that. Okay. Next is the wave number. See, wave number is nothing but the number of waves in a unit length, which means suppose if at all I'm I'm just checking, we both are standing here, and between both of us, if there is 1 unit distance, that 1 unit could be 1 centimeter, 1 meter, then how many waves are present in it represents the wave number. Okay, and this entire one crest and one trough represents one wave. So like that, how many waves do we have represents wave number. So these are 5 important wave characteristics. So revise that once. Okay. Next, what we can say that the energy carried by this electromagnetic radiation, right? The energy what it carried by the electromagnetic radiation can be given as h into nu, where h is the Planck's constant and nu is the frequency of that wave. Or I can write this as hc by lambda also, or hc into nu bar, because nu bar, which is wave number, is nothing but 1 by lambda. So these are the ways to represent the energy of that particular wave. Okay. If you study that in the terms of particle, we call it as photon, but we are yet to come there. I am just trying to tell you what is the energy of that single wave. So single wave, what we represent is h nu, we write it as hc by lambda. See, the value of h is found to be this 6.625 into 10 raised to power of minus 34. Okay. And if you have, suppose if you write in terms of photons, which is the particle behavior, then we need to count the total number of photons also to get the total energy. So the total energy of the entire wave, or what we call it as the light, you can write it as n into h nu. N is the total number of photons into h nu. H nu is the energy of one photon. So E is equal to n h nu. That is the total energy. Right. So this would be useful for problem solving. Let me show you where it is been more useful. Suppose if you asked energy associated with an electromagnetic wave whose wavelength is 5000, right? So wavelength is given, I have to calculate energy now. So we simply start with h nu, which is hc by lambda, and I'll substitute this 6.625 into 10 raised to power of minus 34 into 3 into 10 raised to power of 8 divided by lambda, which is 5 into 10 raised to power of minus 7. Because when I say 5000 Armstrongs, 5000 into 10 raised to power of minus 10 meters, this is what you will get in meters. So which becomes 5 into 10 raised to power of minus 7 meters. And this is meters per second square, meters per second. Now, whenever you multiply these two, right, okay, you can easily remember that this value comes out to be 2 into 10 raised to power of minus 25 approximately. So while solving, wherever you get h and c multiplication, directly write 2 into 10 raised to power of minus 25. Easy to solve. Okay. So you would get that as energy, will get this as approximately 4 into 10 raised to power of minus 19. Okay. Suppose this value what I got is in joules, right, because I am writing everything in SI unit. But we want answer always in electron volts. You would be asked energy in electron volts, right? So either you can do this 3, we can write this as 4 into 10 raised to power of minus 19 divided by 1.6 into 10 raised to power of minus 19. This value will always convert that joules into electron volts. That comes out to be 2.5 electron volts, right? Or you can directly write the energy in terms of electron volts here as 12420 by lambda in Armstrongs, or 1242 by lambda in nanometers. So I would suggest use this directly to solve the questions. Very fast way you can solve it. This is very useful going ahead in the questions. Okay, energy in electron volts, especially photoelectric effect and those cases, you will learn it easily. So first let me just put that first, right? You can check what are electromagnetic spectrum. It is nothing but a collection of wavelengths, right? So if at all you put all the collection of wavelengths on one particular piece of paper, you can see that if the wavelength is in the range of 10 raised to power of minus 12, those are gamma rays. As you go towards 10 raised to power of minus 10 and above, up to here, this is ultra X-rays, and from here to here you will see these are UV rays. This range is visible range. Visible range is 4 into 10 raised to power of minus 7 meters to 7 into 10 raised to power of minus 7 meters in wavelength. That's how you'll get infra, micro, radio waves and so on. So one thing you got to remember, in questions directly this is asked. Gamma is greater than X-rays, then UV, then visible region, then infrared, micro and radio. This is in terms of frequency. Okay. In terms of wavelength, it is exactly opposite. Got it? So more frequency, more energy. So if you ask the energy comparison also, gamma is having more energy than X-rays, UV and so on. Within the visible region, we have all these colors starting from here, from violet, and it is extended towards red. So again, in visible region, frequency is being asked, then Vibgyor would be the order. Between FM and AM it is been asked, because in radio waves we will have FM and AM. FM will have more frequency compared to that of AM. Yeah. This much, this is a very static information you must know. Okay. Next. One thing when it comes to this is again objective type questions asked, like how do we prove that light has a wave nature? There are two important phenomena by which we can prove. One is interference, the other one is diffraction. You may have come across in school about Young's double slit experiment. Suppose if at all I take light to pass through two small slits here, then as the light from this side and this side, these are called as wave fronts, they will meet with each other. They will start making interference, which means interference means they will either add up or they get subtracted. Suppose if both waves are here like this, they get add up and their amplitude increases. If the wave is going this way, the other wave is coming this way, they will subtract with each other and they will get this way. So you can see wherever there are white regions, those are all added up ones. These dark regions are the ones which are subtracted ones. The added up ones, these are called constructive interference. Constructive interference. And when it gets subtracted, we call it as destructive interference. The same thing you will observe even in the water also. When if you create ripples will also make constructive and destructive interference. Got it? So this is first interference phenomena. Diffraction is nothing but, when light is passed through this, it is not going in one direction, it is getting expanded throughout the region, and this phenomena of light getting expanded, this is called diffraction. So in the you can see that, you can feel that when the light comes through a small slit into your room, so you will see the light slowly spreads out. So that phenomena is called diffraction, and this is only possible if the light is of a wave nature. If it is a particle, suppose if it is a slit and you send a particle will only go in one direction. It won't try to go in this direction or this direction, right? So definitely diffraction is a phenomena for wave behavior only. I hope you understood these two. So these two phenomena helps us understand that there is a wave nature. Now, most of the time we'll spend in particle behavior. So, when it comes to particle nature of light, phenomena like, photoelectric effect, PEE, black body radiation, BBR, correct? Crompton effect, which is same as photoelectric effect, and variation of heat capacities of solid, which means changes in the color of metals when you heat it. All of these phenomena can be explained only by particle behavior, not by wave behavior of light. Okay. Now, to explain this, we have to consider something called the quantum behavior or the quantum nature of electromagnetic radiation. In short, we say that electromagnetic radiation will get quantized, right? So, quantization is that principle which was first developed by Max Planck, and he was trying to explain how the black body radiation has some color changes. I will explain that in a minute. Now, according to the quantum nature, right, the light travels in the form of packets of energy called as quanta. If it comes from sunlight, we usually call it as photon, but otherwise it is called as quanta. So, the same wave behavior which we were learning for a light, imagine as if these are packet of energies moving, right? So, that is called quanta. So, if you have n number of photons, we say we have total energy as n into h nu, and 1 mole of energy, 1 mole of photons energy is called 1 Einstein. Okay. First, we will see what are the type of questions that could be asked using the quantum behavior of light. See, suppose if a question is given like this: a 100-watt bulb is emitting photons with frequency 10 raised to power of 14 hertz. How many photons is emitted per minute? Please try that, everyone. Body is dissipating every radiation, but intensity of one particular color is more. That's why we are trying to see that as the color as the average of all the colors. Got it? So that's what I said, the intensity of all the colors are different. Okay. So one particular color will comes to be the maximum contributor. Correct? And this was identified by Wien's displacement law, a very important fundamental known as Wien's displacement law. What he has observed, that the lambda maximum value multiplied by the temperature at which it is maintained is always coming out to be a constant value, which is 0.29 centimeters kelvins, which means you can see that here this lambda 3 multiplied by T3, lambda 2 multiplied by T2, lambda 1 multiplied by T1, those are all equal. Another objective type question, this was asked. This was also asked, like how they are related to each other. Are they greater than, less than, and so on. Lambda 1 T1 is equal to lambda 2 T2, lambda 3 T3. It has been found for most of the metals. So this is what Wien's displacement law tells us, that lambda max multiplied by temperature is coming out to this value. Okay. Now this would immensely help us understand black body radiation better. Alright. And another thing you will find out, see whatever the area under this graph, suppose if you check out this area, got it? So what is this area under the graph we are getting? This is about all the colors we are getting, right? Correct? So that's why it reflects how much amount of total energy that is emitted, because it is giving all these radiations. So area under the graph here represents the total energy emitted. I hope you understood Wien's displacement law, what is black body radiation, how this impacted Planck's theory. See how Planck's theory was made more official. You can check out, see how the lambda value is decreasing as the temperature is increasing. Can you see that? Lambda is decreasing as the temperature is increasing. Achha, if lambda decreases, which means frequency will increase. So which means as the temperature is increasing, frequency is increasing. Temperature is increasing, which means you are increasing the energy, right? You are supplying more energy. So if energy increasing, nu is increasing. So that is energy is directly related to nu, and from there I can write E is equal to h nu. I hope now you understood how experimentally also we were able to derive the Planck's theory. Now this is a question that was asked once in JEE, like assuming sun to be black body and the surface temperature of the sun is 5800 kelvins. Calculate the position of the peak in BBR curve, which means lambda max. You have to calculate lambda max. Second, if the temperature of sun come down to 2900, then what is the lambda max? All I can tell you, I will help you with the formula. Lambda max into temperature is coming out to be 0.29 centimeter Kelvin.